Hello, this is Zach back with some original poetry. Yeah, I've got a little time off. As many of you know, I'm a teacher on some Easter, Holy Week, spring vacation, and I'm leaning into the spirit of growth, imperfection, and original poetry. So like the last time, I wrote this poem this morning. It's been something that's been on my mind for a while, honestly, the theme of this poem, but I wanted to share it. So let me jump into it. As many of you know, I am a teacher, and so a lot of this controversy surrounding the so-called CRT being taught in schools, public and private, it hits home for me personally. So this poem is really yeah, it's a poem that's in response to some of the stuff that's happening right now. It's one of the reasons that I'm reciting it out loud, even though I just wrote it this morning. It's because like I actually don't want to sit on it for 5 months and try to revise the heck of it. I'm sure I will later, but right now I want to read it. So here we go. It's an erasure, which means that it's a found poem, meaning the text of the poem I actually kind of discovered via actual words that real people have spoken. So one of the people, the speakers, is Chris Rufo. I want to say more about Chris as this recording goes on. But he's kind of the architect of the movement against what he calls CRT or critical race theory being taught in schools. Although there's a lot of dispute about whether that's actually happening, and I would say it's not happening the way he thinks it is. But he laid out kind of his strategy for what's happening that we see, kind of across the country at school board meetings. And it was in a tweet in March of 2021. So this is kind of the found text for me that I'm actually going to do some erasure of to get to what I see as kind of the heart of what he's doing and what others who are following him are doing. So this is his tweet. I'll read my erasure afterwards as part one of my poem. Rufo says on Twitter, "We have successfully frozen their brand, critical race theory, into the public conversation and are steadily driving up negative perceptions. We will eventually turn it toxic as we put all of the various cultural insanities under that brand category. The goal is to have the public read something crazy in the newspaper and immediately think critical race theory. We have decodified the term and will recodify it to annex the entire range of cultural construction that are unpopular with Americans." So that's Rufo. It's part one of this poem that I'll read in a moment. And yeah, so I think like a lot of political thinkers, he writes kind of in code and wants to say things without saying them. And I definitely think that's happening across the board, across the school boards across the country. So that's the first one, part of this poem. It's intimately connected to the second one, which is actually a quote from Thomas Jefferson, right, one of the founding fathers. And I don't know if everybody knows this, but Jefferson was definitely not a Christian. He was a deist. And he did not, he admired Jesus as a moralist, as a speaker of truths, but he did not believe in any of the miracles, certainly did not believe in the resurrection of Jesus. And so he actually decided to make his own Bible, right? Jefferson's Bible. And in Jefferson's Bible, right, which he kind of stitches together from the Gospels, anytime there's a miracle or something supernatural, he actually excises it. It's like this big cut and paste exercise. And so my poem, part two, takes and erases some of the very last words of Jefferson's Bible, which is from John chapter 19. So he does not have the resurrection. He ends with Jesus being laid in the tomb. So here's what I'm erasing part of my poem from Jefferson. This is part two of my poem. "Now in the place where he was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden a new sepulchre, pardon me, wherein was never man Okay, so you have the original text, which I think is actually important because I don't want to defame either of these people, right? But this is what I see as, so those are the actual words in their texts, and this is actually what I see as happening from those texts being received by real people in the world. The poem that I've written, or rather found, is called Rufo's America, Jefferson's Gospel. Two erasures. One, we have frozen the public. We will turn it toxic. The goal is to have the public crazy. We have decodified and will recodify it to annex the unpopular Americans. Two, now, in the place where there was a garden, a new sepulchre, a great stone. Okay, so that was the poem. I wanted to say a little bit post-reading as well. So often I just read the poem and kind of say a little bit about it. This is my own poem, so I want to talk a little bit about where it's coming from. So many of you know that I was definitely raised in a very conservative family, went to very conservative high schools, colleges, and have changed ideologically. What hasn't changed, though, is a deep faith commitment. And so I find myself in the awkward position sometimes of engaging across an ideological spectrum. It can get intense, as you might imagine. So I really want to read deeply those people I disagree with. And as you can see, Chris Rufo is definitely someone I deeply disagree with, and really see the movement that he has spawned as really wrongheaded and actually hurtful to community and especially to education. But I want to understand him. I want to give him the benefit of the doubt and at least engaging with his ideas. This week, when I've had some time off because it's been on my mind, I actually wanted to kind of look beyond the sound bites and get into, who is this person? I was, looking at his Twitter. Everything happens on Twitter. And saw that he recently gave a speech at Hillsdale College, which is a prominent politically conservative college. And so in this speech, which is called Laying Siege to Our Institutions, Rufo is essentially trying to kind of lay out or chronicle a history from 1968 to where we are now. If I'm understanding him correctly, one of the key kind of events that happens from 1968 to now is that some of the street activists or protesters, as he calls them, migrated from protests in basically kind of in disappointment that they weren't able to achieve some of their radical aims, and migrated from the streets to the academy. And so now we have kind of an elite group of academics or leftist thinkers that are kind of dictating to the masses, if I'm understanding Rufo correctly. And one of the other things he says, so it's really interesting. He starts in 1968, and then he notes that the body of everyday Americans really didn't want the radicalism of that era, and so that's why Nixon was elected and became the law and order president. And you can see a lot of parallels between Nixon and Trump today. But what struck me in listening to this speech, which I will put a link just so you can check it out for yourself. I recommend engaging with it. What struck me is all the omissions in this chronicling. Right? Rufo begins in 1968 and neglects to mention probably what I think is the most significant thing that happened in 1968, which was the murder of Martin Luther King Jr. And then, right, the subsequent uprising in American cities across the country. And the disappointment had to do with, look, this was a non-violent African-American leader, and look what happened to him. That was kind of the rage, the disappointment, the hopelessness that you saw in cities across the country, and white flight through many of those cities, right? And so Nixon's election is not an accident, but to name that and not name the context, to me, is an erasure in itself. It's one of the reasons that I think erasure is appropriate in approaching Rufo as a thinker. So I was really struck by that. I've gone on long enough. You can see I'm not a political analyst. I'm a poet. But I do want to say also, in terms of omission, when he's talking about, this idea of critical race theory in the classroom, I notice that he really does not talk at all about the events that led up to why he's invented or kind of used critical race theory as this kind of rubric or catch-all to throw everything at. And that's because of murders of African Americans, right? George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. I mean, the list could go on. But those three in particular sparked a racial reckoning. And so it's not like all of a sudden there's this critical race theory that just became something that people wanted to talk about, right? People saw the footage of these murders themselves and wanted to say, "Whoa, this is sickness in our country, and we don't want this anymore." And so I really do. You can tell I'm kind of worked up about this. I disagree with his assessment completely, and I think it's harmful, right? I really do. So the last thing I want to quote from that actual talk, which I think is really important to note, this is something that Rufo has said, is that he's really going after public schools, right? He's pretty unapologetic about it. In this speech to Hillsdale College, he said, and I'm quoting, he said, "To get universal school choice," so everyone can decide where they want to go to school, private school, their choice. "To get universal school choice, you really have to operate from a premise of universal public school distrust." And then, this is at the end of the speech, so I'm kind of eliding. He says, "The best strategy in the near term is the siege of the institutions. And we, conservatives, I think he's saying, should prepare for the fight." And that's the last word of his talk. And it's really striking to hear an extremely prominent conservative use this kind of language about institutions. And I do think that he's hitting right at the fabric of our communities by attacking the public school system as an institution and working to sow distrust. And he's doing that, I mean, very openly. He's not making it a secret. So with that analysis in mind, I want to read something as a kind of text of nourishment for teachers like me who want to teach the whole truth about American history and also want to keep our jobs. I'm a private school teacher, so I don't think I face the same issues that so many public school teachers are facing. But I think what I would like to do in closing this extended poetic meditation is actually read from King himself. So I said 1968. The thing that I would remember most about 1968 is King's murder, and also I want to remember and honor King himself. People quote "I have a dream" all the time, but people don't read a lot or as much the final speech that he gave, and that's what I'm going to read from. Kind of the closing lines of that. So, this is his "I've been to the mountaintop" speech, April 3rd. He was murdered the 4th. And he, in this speech, does a meditation on the parable of the Good Samaritan, Jesus' famous parable. And he tries to kind of put himself in an Ignatian way. I've got the Jesuit connections. In an Ignatian way, kind of puts himself into that scene. So I'm going to read the last two paragraphs there. King, thinking about the parable and being in the position of someone seeing the Good Samaritan and what it would mean to care for that person. "But I'm going to tell you what my imagination tells me. It's possible that those men were afraid, the men who passed by the Samaritan. You see, the Jericho road is a dangerous road. I remember when Mrs. King and I were first in Jerusalem, we rented a car and drove from Jerusalem down to Jericho. And as soon as we got on that road, I said to my wife, I can see why Jesus used this as the setting for his parable. It's a winding, meandering road. It's really conducive for ambushing. You start out in Jerusalem, which is about 1,200 feet above sea level. And by the time you get down to Jericho, 15 or 20 minutes later, you're about 2,200 feet below sea level. That's a dangerous road. In the days of Jesus, it came to be known as the Bloody Pass. And you know, it's possible that the priest and the Levite looked over that man on the ground and wondered if the robbers were still around. Or it's possible that they felt the man on the ground was merely faking. And he was acting like he'd been robbed and hurt in order to seize them over there, lure them there for quick and easy seizure. And so the first question the priest asked, the first question the Levite asked was, if I stop to help this man, what will happen to me? But then the Good Samaritan came by. I've just misidentified. The Samaritan is the man who helps the wounded. See, I don't know my Bible very well. And he reversed the question. Thank you, King. If I do not stop to help this man, what will happen to him? That's the question before you tonight. Not, if I stop to help the sanitation workers, what will happen to my job? Not, if I stop to help the sanitation workers, what will happen to all of the hours that I usually spend in my office every day and every week as a pastor? The question is not, if I stop to help this man in need, what will happen to me? The question is, if I do not stop to help the sanitation workers, what will happen to them? That's the question. Let us rise up tonight with a greater readiness. Let us stand with a greater determination. And let us move on in these powerful days, these days of challenge, to make America what it ought to be. We have an opportunity to make America a better nation. And I want to thank God once more for allowing me to be here with you. Thanks, King. And thanks to all those teachers who are doing courageous, brave, honest work and telling the truth about our country. Hope it's a great rest of Holy Week for y'all, and great Easter, great spring break, whatever your beliefs are. Peace to you.